The Galaxy Council was buzzing with activity. In the vast space station that orbited a distant star, representatives from different species sat in a large room, waiting for the urgent message to be delivered. On the screen, a human officer appeared, her expression serious. "Attention, everyone," she said, her voice steady but filled with warning. "There is an important matter we need to discuss. A message has been sent across the galaxy to every known species, but it seems some have not taken it seriously." The officers and diplomats looked at each other curious. The officer continued, "Humans are not to be underestimated. We may be smaller in number, but we are not weak. The message is simple. Do not engage with us unless you are prepared for the consequences." A few murmurs broke out among the representatives. Some were skeptical. Others looked concerned. "You're saying that we should fear humans?" One alien from the Tridorian species raised an eyebrow. "They are no different from any other species we've encountered. If they are so dangerous, why haven't we seen proof of it?" The human officer's face remained calm, though her eyes carried a sense of gravity. She replied, "We've never sought conflict, but if pushed, we can defend ourselves in ways you cannot imagine. Our technology, our intelligence, and our unity make us stronger than many realize." Another alien, a member of the Arcanus race, leaned forward. "You expect us to believe that the humans, who have never expanded beyond their own planet, could somehow match the strength of an empire like the Zorak?" The officer nodded. "You will soon find out." The council room fell silent. It wasn't just the humans who had warned others. Many species had heard of their warnings over the years, but this was the first time that such an urgent message had been broadcast to every corner of the galaxy. The message was clear: stay away from humanity. The officer spoke again, her tone even more serious. "The Zorak Empire has ignored this warning. They have decided that humans are easy prey. They think they can conquer Earth with their massive fleets, but they are gravely mistaken. The Zorak are about to learn that humanity is not to be trifled with." A tall alien named Vokar, from the Vithor species, crossed his arms. "The Zorak have never lost a war. They've swept across countless systems. If they are making this mistake, then surely humans are no match for them." The human officer didn't flinch. "The Zorak will be surprised. They won't even see it coming." There was a brief pause, and then the officer turned to the screen, tapping a few buttons. The room darkened, and a hologram appeared. It was a recording, showing a battle. The Zorak fleet, massive and intimidating, hovered over an unknown planet, their weapons charged and ready for destruction. But the moment they fired, something strange happened. The human ships, which were supposed to be unprepared, suddenly appeared out of nowhere, surrounding the Zorak fleet. The Zorak tried to fight back, but their weapons malfunctioned, their ships shutting down one by one. The human fleet didn't need to engage in direct combat. They simply shut down the Zorak technology, leaving them helpless. The recording ended. The officer's voice was calm but firm. "This is what happens when you underestimate humans. The Zorak believed they could destroy us easily. Now their ships are floating, powerless, and broken. This is just the beginning." The council members were stunned. Some didn't want to believe it. Others began to realize the truth in the human officer's words. "You should understand now," she said, looking at the assembled diplomats. "This is a warning to everyone. We don't want conflict. We've always chosen peace, but if anyone decides to challenge us, they will learn that humanity is not weak." The officer turned and walked out of the room, leaving the council members to process the message. The aliens whispered among themselves, exchanging uncertain glances. They had never considered humans a threat, but now they were starting to understand. If a species like the Zorak, one of the most powerful in the galaxy, could be so easily defeated, then maybe humans were something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Outside the council chamber, the officer's words echoed in the minds of everyone who had heard them. The message was simple, yet powerful. Do not fight the humans. If anyone chose to ignore this warning, they would soon find out that humanity was not to be underestimated. But the question remained, would other species heed the warning, or would they be foolish enough to make the same mistake the Zorak had? Only time would tell. Zorak ships arrived at the edge of human space, their fleet massive and overwhelming. The stars twinkled in the background, casting a quiet calm over the dark expanse of space. The crew of the flagship, under the command of General Rakar, felt confident as they approached the human territories. They had been warned by many species about the humans, warnings they had ignored. To them, the humans were nothing more than a small primitive species, unfit to challenge the might of the Zorak Empire. Rekar stood at the front of the ship's command room, staring out into the void. He had heard the rumors, heard the stories of humans defeating larger forces with ease, but he dismissed them as exaggerations. The Zorak had been victorious in countless wars, crushing civilizations far more advanced than humans, and he was certain that this would be no different. Prepare to enter the human sector, Rekar commanded, his voice steady. Let's see for ourselves what makes these humans so special. As the fleet advanced, they received a communication from the humans, a simple message displayed on the screen. We do not want war. We ask that you leave our space peacefully. Rekar scoffed at the message. It's a trap. They're trying to avoid conflict, but we will show them that we are not to be disrespected. He ordered the fleet to ignore the peaceful plea and continue forward, his pride clouding his judgment. The Zorak ships powered on, their engines burning bright as they crossed into human space. But they soon noticed something strange. There was no resistance. No human ships appeared to stop them. In fact, there was nothing at all, just empty space. The silence stretched on, making the officers uneasy. Where are they? One of them asked, glancing nervously at the empty stars. We've been led into a trap, Rekar said with confidence. They're hiding somewhere, waiting for us to make a move. But as they continued deeper into human territory, the silence grew more and more unsettling. The Zorak fleet was now in the heart of human space, but there was no sign of human ships, no signs of any forces. It was as though the humans had simply vanished. Rekar's grip on the armrest tightened. He ordered his fleet to stop. And for the first time, he felt a sense of unease creeping over him. Activate the long-range scanners, he ordered. Find them. The crew worked quickly, scanning the surrounding space for any sign of human ships. The silence continued, but soon, a faint signal appeared on the screens. A small human ship, barely noticeable, moving silently among the stars. There, one of the officers said, pointing to the screen. Rekar's eyes narrowed. What is it doing? Why isn't it engaging? The human ship didn't respond to the Zorak fleet, nor did it seem to pose any threat. It simply glided through the darkness, moving with purpose but without aggression. It was as though it were studying them, waiting for something. Prepare to send a message, Rekar said, determined to show the humans they were in control. Let them know we're here. But just as he finished speaking, the unexpected happened. Without warning, the scanners went dark. The long-range sensors, which had been showing the human ship's position, were now completely blank. The entire fleet had lost contact with the human vessel, as if it had vanished into thin air. The crew scrambled, but nothing could explain the sudden loss of all readings. The only thing that remained was the eerie silence. Where did it go? One of the officers asked, panic rising in their voice. We're being watched, Rekar said, now uneasy. They're toying with us. His words were just a few moments too late. Suddenly, the long-range scanners blinked back on. And this time, it wasn't just one human ship. They were surrounded. Hundreds of small human vessels, invisible just moments before, had appeared from behind moons and asteroids. They had come from every direction, surrounding the entire Zorak fleet. Rekar's heart skipped a beat. How did they do this? We didn't see them approach. The human ships didn't engage. They didn't fire weapons. Instead, they moved with precision, cutting off any escape routes, forcing the Zorak fleet into a tight formation. The Zorak officers exchanged confused looks as they watched the small ships move closer, almost as if they were circling their prey. "Prepare for battle," Rekar ordered, his voice filled with frustration. "We can still fight our way out of this." But the humans didn't fire a single shot. The Zorak fleet, despite its superior firepower, felt trapped and vulnerable, unable to move or react as the human ships circled around them like shadows. Rekar was about to issue another command when, without warning, the Zorak ships began to malfunction. It started slowly at first. One ship's engine sputtered. Then another's communication systems flickered out. Then the weapons on several ships stopped responding altogether. "What's happening?" Rekar shouted. "Why are our systems failing?" It was as though the human ships had done nothing more than quietly disable their technology, silently rendering the Zorak fleet powerless. There was no explosion, no grand confrontation. It was an invisible attack, one that had left the Zorak helpless and at the mercy of their unseen foes. As the last of the Zorak ships lost their ability to function, the human ships slowly began to move away. They didn't chase or attack. They simply withdrew, leaving the Zorak fleet stranded and helpless in the middle of human space. Rekar stood frozen, his face pale. This isn't possible. He had been warned, and now the Zorak Empire would pay the price for underestimating humanity. The Zorak fleet, now crippled and stranded in the heart of human space, drifted silently through the dark expanse. Their once proud and powerful vessels now resembled nothing more than inactive hulks, floating aimlessly. Their communication systems were down, their weapons useless, and their engines had all but failed. The once intimidating fleet that had conquered countless systems was now powerless, at the mercy of the very species they had sought to challenge. Rekar stood alone on the bridge of his flagship, his face grim. His crew was in a state of disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The human ships that had surrounded them were now gone, leaving only silence in their wake. The officers whispered among themselves, exchanging looks of confusion and fear. We were caught completely off guard," one of the officers murmured, staring at the dark void outside. Rekar clenched his fists, still unable to process the situation. He had always believed that the Zorak Empire was invincible. The stories of the humans' strange abilities had seemed far-fetched, something to be laughed at. But now, here they were, helpless, stranded, and utterly vulnerable. "Why didn't they finish us off?" another officer asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Rekar turned to face them, his eyes narrowing. "I don't know," he said, his voice cold. "But whatever their reasons are, we can't afford to underestimate them any longer. We must find a way to fight back, or we will be left stranded here forever." The silence in the command room deepened. The crew knew that their options were limited. They had no communication with the outside world, no way of contacting reinforcements. The human ships had shown no signs of aggression, but their actions spoke volumes. They had made their point without firing a single shot. For hours, the Zorak ships remained motionless, their crew members working frantically to try to repair their systems. But nothing worked. The technology that had once made them so powerful seemed to be rendered useless in the face of the humans' abilities. It was as though the very fabric of their ships had been tampered with, leaving them with no way of escaping the human trap. As time passed, Rekar's frustration grew. He had never felt so helpless. The Zorak had faced countless enemies, from powerful warlords to entire civilizations, and yet they had never been forced into such a position. The humans had done something to them that none of their enemies had ever been able to do, without firing a single shot, without a single battle. "General, we've managed to establish a weak signal," one of the officers suddenly spoke up. "We might be able to send a distress message." Rekar's eyes brightened for a moment. "Do it. Send the message. Contact Zorak Command. Tell them what's happened." The officer quickly typed commands into the console, and the message was sent out into the vast emptiness of space. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. If they could just get a message to their fleet, perhaps they could send reinforcements or provide some sort of support. But the hours turned into days, and still there was no response. The silence in space was overwhelming. The Zorak fleet remained stuck in the same position, unable to move or escape. The crew's morale began to deteriorate, and whispers of fear spread through the ships. Some began to question if they would ever make it out of this situation alive. Rakkar paced the bridge, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that the humans were watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The way they had disabled their technology so effortlessly, it was almost as if they had known exactly how to neutralize the Zorak's power. Suddenly, a soft chime echoed through the bridge, and the communication system flickered to life. The crew looked at the screen in disbelief as a human face appeared. It was the same officer who had issued the warning, her expression calm and unbothered by the sight of their fleet in disarray. "You've made a mistake," she said simply. Rakkar's anger flared. "What do you want from us? Why are you doing this?" The human officer's eyes were steady. "We don't want anything from you. We didn't seek this conflict. You are the ones who chose to enter our space, to provoke us. All we wanted was peace." Rakkar's voice rose in frustration. "We didn't provoke you. We came to conquer." "You came to conquer, yes," the officer interrupted, her voice unwavering. "But you didn't listen when we warned you. We didn't seek war, but you forced our hand. The humans you dismissed as weak have a way of protecting themselves. We fight only when we must, but when we do, we show no mercy." The officer paused, letting her words sink in. Rakkar was speechless, his anger now replaced by confusion. He had thought the humans were insignificant, easy targets for the might of the Zorak Empire. But now he realized how wrong he had been. He had underestimated them in every way. The officer continued, her tone gentle but firm. "This is your final warning. Leave our space, and we will let you go. But if you stay, you will learn the hard way that humans are not to be trifled with." The communication cut off abruptly, leaving Rakkar in stunned silence. He turned to his officers, who were all watching him with wide eyes, waiting for his next command. For the first time in his life, Rakkar felt something he had never experienced before: doubt. He had always been certain of the Zorak's superiority, but now everything had changed. The humans had shown him that they were not like any enemy he had faced before. They had proven themselves to be far more powerful than he could have ever imagined. "We have to leave," Rakkar said finally, his voice heavy with realization. "We've made a mistake. We underestimated them." As the Zorak fleet slowly began to retreat, leaving human space behind, Rakkar couldn't help but wonder what other secrets humanity held, what other surprises they might have in store. One thing was certain: they would never again make the mistake of underestimating the humans. As the Zorak fleet withdrew from human space, the silence in the command room was deafening. The once proud ships, now disheartened and unsure, retreated into the vastness of space. The sense of defeat lingered in the air, thick with the realization that they had underestimated the very species they had come to conquer. Rakkar stood silently at the helm, his mind racing with the events that had unfolded. For the first time in his life, he questioned everything he had believed about the Zorak Empire's supremacy. As the fleet moved further away from human space, a message appeared on the communication screen. It wasn't a distress signal or a plea for help. It was simply a message from the humans. The text was short, but its impact was undeniable. "This is the last time you will be warned." Rakkar stared at the screen, his fingers hovering over the controls. The words were calm, almost too calm. It was as though the humans were in no hurry to engage in any further conflict. They were simply stating a fact. There was no anger, no threat in their words, just an undeniable certainty. They had made their point, and now they were allowing the Zorak to leave, but with a reminder that this was the end of the road. "I don't understand," one of the officers said softly. "Why didn't they finish us off? Why didn't they chase us, or strike while we were vulnerable?" Rekar's expression darkened as he tried to make sense of it all. "It's not about what they could do. It's about what they chose not to do," he replied, his voice heavy. "The humans are different from any species we've ever encountered. They don't need to prove their strength. They just show it." The rest of the crew fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. The human ships had demonstrated an extraordinary level of control, neutralizing their technology and forcing them into submission without shedding a drop of blood. They had done this with no visible weapons, no overwhelming force, just calm, calculated precision. It was as though the humans had been playing a game, one in which the Zorak were nothing more than pawns. As the fleet continued its retreat, Rekar's mind kept replaying the earlier moments. The eerie calm, the complete lack of resistance, the way the humans had surrounded them without a single word of provocation. It was all so disorienting. They had always believed that the larger, stronger force would always prevail. But here, in the heart of human space, they had learned a different truth. "General, we've received a transmission from the fleet's command," another officer said, breaking the silence. "They've received your distress signal, and reinforcements are on the way. They're preparing to launch a counteroffensive." Rekar's eyes narrowed. The idea of reinforcements gave him a brief moment of hope, but something deep within him told him that it would not be enough. He had seen the way the humans had handled the situation, and he understood now that brute force alone would not be enough to win. They would need more than just numbers. They would need a new strategy, a new understanding of their enemy. "We can't just charge back into human space like we did before," Rekar said, pacing the bridge. "If we go in without a plan, we'll only fall into their trap again. We need to understand how they operate. We need to study them." The crew exchanged looks of uncertainty, but Rekar's resolve was clear. "Start by gathering any intelligence we can on human technology. I want every resource focused on learning how they disabled our ships. We need to know how they do it. We need to know everything." The officers nodded, already moving to carry out his orders. But even as they worked, Rekar couldn't shake the nagging feeling that they were still missing something crucial. The humans hadn't destroyed them. They had simply disabled them, incapacitating their fleet without a single loss. It wasn't a victory in the traditional sense. It was something far more profound. For the next few days, the Zorak fleet drifted through space, working to repair their systems and gather as much information as they could. Rekar had ordered them to maintain radio silence, to avoid drawing attention, but in the back of his mind, he couldn't help but wonder if the humans were still watching. There was no sign of them, no indication that they were pursuing the fleet or even keeping track of their movements, yet Rekar felt certain that the humans knew exactly where they were. As the repairs continued, a few officers began to voice their concerns. "What if we can't repair our ships in time? What if they strike before we're ready? Then we'll have to fight," Rekar replied, though his voice lacked the usual conviction. "But this time, we'll be prepared. We'll learn from our mistakes." The days turned into weeks, and the Zorak fleet slowly regained some of its former strength. The reinforcements arrived, bringing with them additional ships, but Rekar's mind remained preoccupied with the same question. Why had the humans chosen to let them go? What was their endgame? Then one day, as the fleet was nearing the outer rim of human space, they received another transmission from the same human officer who had communicated with them before. This time, however, the message was different. The officer's face appeared on the screen again, but her expression was not one of calm. It was one of quiet resolve. "You've had your chance," she said softly. "You've been warned. Leave now, or the consequences will be more than you can handle." Rekar's blood ran cold. There was no threat in her voice, no anger, just a quiet certainty that sent a chill down his spine. The humans were not afraid of them. They were not intimidated. They were simply waiting, and they were ready. As the message ended, Rekar looked out into the blackness of space, his mind racing. The humans had given them an ultimatum, but it was clear now that they were not bluffing. The Zorak had been given a choice: retreat and live, or stay and face something they couldn't even begin to understand. With a deep breath, Rekar knew that the time had come. They could no longer underestimate the humans. The next move would be their most critical yet, and failure would mean far more than just defeat. It would mean extinction. The Zorak fleet, now fully repaired and reinforced, sat on the edge of human space. The tension aboard each ship was palpable. The crew, once filled with confidence, now questioned every move they made. They had been given a second chance, but the realization that they were dealing with a species capable of such calm power had shaken them to their core. The humans had shown restraint, and that was perhaps the most terrifying part of it all. Rekar stood at the command center of his flagship, his mind swirling with 1,000 different thoughts. The latest transmission from the humans had not been a warning. It had been a promise. They had given the Zorak a choice, a chance to leave and avoid further conflict. Yet the Zorak could not bring themselves to turn back. Pride, ambition, and the fear of being seen as weak pushed them forward. "General, the fleet is ready," said one of his officers, breaking Rekar from his thoughts. "We can engage whenever you give the word." Rekar's gaze remained fixed on the vast expanse of space ahead. He could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. The humans had let them retreat once, but would they do so again? The human strength was not in their weapons, but in their ability to control the situation without ever firing a shot. They had proven that they could neutralize the Zorak's might with ease. Would the Zorak be able to do the same? "We proceed as planned," Rekar said after a long pause, his voice firm but unsure. "But we do it carefully. We cannot afford to make another mistake." As the fleet began its slow advance into human space, the tension among the crew only increased. The Zorak ships were powerful, more powerful than anything the humans had shown. But the humans were a puzzle. How could such a seemingly insignificant species have such control over the battlefield without ever seeming to fight? The Zorak fleet moved into position, but something felt different this time. There was no sign of the humans. No ships appeared on the scanners. No comms chatter. It was as if the humans had disappeared entirely. "Why haven't they shown themselves?" one of the officers asked, her voice edged with uncertainty. "This doesn't feel right." Rekar felt the same way. The absence of the humans was unsettling. It was as if they were waiting for something. Rekar had learned one thing during this entire ordeal. The humans were never in a hurry. They were patient, calculating, and they were always 3 steps ahead. "Hold steady," Rekar ordered. "Wait for them to make a move." Minutes stretched into hours, and still there was no sign of human ships. The Zorak fleet had entered human space, and yet nothing. The silence was almost oppressive. It gnawed at the edges of Rekar's mind, filling him with a sense of dread. "General, we're getting a strange signal," one of the officers said. "It's faint, but it's coming from all directions. It's like—" Before the officer could finish, the ship's sensors flared to life. The scanners were overloaded with readings, and then, suddenly, everything went dark. The entire fleet's systems blinked off, one by one, like falling dominoes. Rekar's heart raced. This was it. The humans had made their move. But nothing happened. No explosions, no fire. The fleet simply sat there, helpless, its once formidable weapons and shields rendered completely useless. "What happened?" Rekar demanded, panic creeping into his voice. "What did they do?" "The systems. They're completely disabled," an officer replied. "It's like they hijacked everything at once." The bridge fell silent as the crew realized the extent of what had happened. The human ships hadn't attacked them. They had simply neutralized their ability to defend themselves. The Zorak ships were now sitting targets in the middle of enemy space. "General, we're completely powerless," another officer said. "We can't fight back, we can't communicate, we can't even move. We're trapped." Rekar's fists clenched in frustration. They had made the same mistake again. They had underestimated the humans. The power that they wielded wasn't in brute force. It was in their ability to control, to disable, and to overwhelm without ever raising a weapon. "Are they watching us?" Rekar asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yes," the officer replied. "They're out there, but they're not engaging. They're just waiting." Rekar stood, staring out into the vastness of space. There were no human ships in sight, but he knew they were out there somewhere. The Zorak fleet was paralyzed. All their might, all their technology, all their experience, none of it mattered. Why? Rekar muttered to himself. Why won't they just finish this? For a long time, there was only silence. The crew was in shock, unsure of what to do next. Rekar could feel the weight of their doubt pressing on him. He had never been in a position like this before, completely out of control, completely powerless. The Zorak Empire had always relied on their strength to resolve conflicts. But here, against the humans, strength alone meant nothing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the communication system flickered to life. The face of the human officer appeared on the screen again. Her expression was calm, but there was a subtle intensity in her eyes. "You still don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice soft but certain. "You think you can win through force, but the truth is, it's never about winning. It's about knowing when to fight and when to walk away." Rekar's eyes narrowed. He wanted to argue, to demand that they be released, to order his fleet to retaliate. But deep down, he knew there was no point. The humans weren't going to destroy them. They didn't need to. They had already won. "You'll never conquer us," the officer continued. "Not with your weapons, not with your armies. You don't even know how to fight the way we do. But if you truly want to leave here, to survive, you'll have to understand that it's not about power. It's about peace. We don't need to fight. We only do so when we have to." The screen went black again, and Rekar was left in stunned silence. He didn't know how to respond. The humans had not shown their strength in the way the Zorak had expected. They had shown it through restraint, through patience, through a quiet, undeniable dominance. The Zorak fleet, now powerless, sat in the heart of human space, waiting. And for the first time in his life, Rekar understood the true meaning of defeat. The stillness in space was almost deafening. The Zorak fleet, now completely disabled, hung motionless in the void, helpless. The ships, once symbols of power, were now little more than drifting husks, their once proud engines useless, their communication systems silent. The humans had achieved their victory without a single shot fired, without a single loss of life. Rekar stood in front of the command console, staring at the blank screen, his mind clouded with confusion. He had led countless successful campaigns, his reputation built on victories won through sheer strength. Yet here he was, humbled in the face of a species so different from any they had encountered before. The Zorak had always believed that their might, their superior technology, and their overwhelming numbers would guarantee them victory over any adversary. But the humans had proven that power alone was not enough. "General," one of the officers said, breaking the silence, "we have tried everything. The systems are completely unresponsive. We can't even send a distress signal. We are stranded." Rekar clenched his fists, his frustration mounting. He had never been in a situation like this. He had always been the one to command, to lead his people to victory. But now he was powerless. The humans had shown him the most humbling lesson of all. It was not strength that determined the outcome of a conflict. It was understanding. The humans had understood them better than they had understood themselves. They had anticipated every move the Zorak had made, and in the end, it was not the Zorak fleet that had prevailed, but the quiet strategy of their opponents. "We need to find a way to communicate with them," Rekar said, his voice trained. "We need to understand what they want. We can't just sit here and wait for them to decide our fate." But as he spoke, he knew it was futile. The humans had made their point. They had given the Zorak a chance to leave, and now they were showing them just how powerless they had become. The humans were in control, and they had no intention of taking further action unless the Zorak chose to push the matter further. The humans were not desperate for victory. They had already won. In the silence that followed, Rakar's thoughts turned inward. What had led them to this point? How had they, the Zorak, once feared throughout the galaxy, ended up in such a vulnerable position? The answer was simple: pride. The Zorak had underestimated their enemy. They had assumed that their size, their strength, and their technology would be enough to crush any opposition. They had never imagined a species like the humans, one that didn't rely on brute force, but on intelligence, patience, and an uncanny ability to anticipate the moves of their enemies. "General," another officer said, his voice hesitant, "we've received a new message from the humans." Rakar's heart skipped a beat. He knew that whatever the message contained, it would not be a simple matter. The humans had already proven that they were not interested in petty displays of power. This message would be another reminder of just how different they were from the Zorak. The officer activated the communication system, and the face of the human officer appeared on the screen once more. This time, however, there was no hint of emotion. Her expression was calm, almost serene, as if she were speaking to someone who was no longer a threat. "Zorak," she said softly, "we've given you every opportunity to leave. We've allowed you to withdraw, and we've disabled your ships, not out of malice, but because we need you to understand something. Power alone is not the key to victory. Understanding is." Rakar's breath caught in his throat. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of an entire galaxy's worth of experience. The human officer was not threatening them. She was teaching them. "You are free to go," she continued. "We have no desire to destroy you, but we will not tolerate any further attempts to invade our space. You have been warned. The choice is yours now." The transmission ended, and the screen went black once more. For a long time, Rakar and his crew were silent. The weight of the message hung heavily in the air. It was not a threat. It was a reminder. The humans had not only defeated them, they had done so with restraint, with wisdom. They had shown the Zorak that there was more to victory than just power. There was also a need for understanding, for knowing when to fight and when to step back. Rakar knew that their pride would never allow them to back down completely. The Zorak were warriors, and warriors did not simply walk away. But deep down, he understood that the humans had won, not through force, but through something far more powerful: their ability to think ahead, to plan, and to understand the bigger picture. As the fleet drifted in the emptiness of space, the Zorak commanders began to speak in hushed tones, their voices tinged with a mixture of fear and respect. For the first time in their long history, they were facing a species that had proven to be not only their equal but their superior in ways they could not yet fully comprehend. The Zorak were used to being the conquerors, the ones who dictated terms, but now they had encountered something far more elusive and dangerous, a species that did not need to conquer to win. Rakar stood, staring into the vastness of space, his mind racing. The humans had given them a choice: leave now or face the consequences. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. The Zorak had no choice but to respect that. Their pride could not carry them forward any longer. It was time for the Zorak to face the truth. "Prepare to leave," Rakar ordered quietly. "We're done here." The crew, though reluctant, followed his orders. They turned their ships around, beginning the slow retreat from human space. But as they left, Rakar couldn't shake the feeling that this would not be the last time they encountered the humans. The Zorak may have lost this battle, but the war, if it could even be called that, was far from over. The humans had shown them the way, and now the Zorak would have to learn to adapt. Whether they liked it or not, the galaxy was no longer theirs to conquer. It belonged to those who understood how to navigate its complexities, and the Zorak had much to learn. The Zorak fleet moved slowly through the empty void of space, a shell of what it once was. The hum of the engines, once a symbol of their power and might, now sounded hollow, almost mournful. Rekar stood at the command center of his flagship, staring out into the vast expanse ahead. The stars flickered in the distance, cold and indifferent. It was the perfect metaphor for what had just transpired. As they sailed farther away from human space, Rekar couldn't help but feel a profound sense of loss, not just for the battle, but for something far deeper. The Zorak had built their empire on the belief that strength was the key to survival, that only through dominance could they secure their place in the galaxy. But in the end, it wasn't strength that had been their downfall. It was their inability to understand the power of restraint, the power of patience. He glanced over at his officers, who were all seated in tense silence. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. They had been beaten, not through force, but through the humans' ability to remain calm, to predict their every move, and to stay 2 steps ahead. It had been a lesson, one that none of them would soon forget. "We underestimated them," Rekar said softly, almost to himself. His voice carried across the quiet bridge, breaking the silence like a ripple across still water. "We thought we could just overpower them, but we were wrong. We couldn't outfight them. We couldn't outthink them." An officer glanced up from the console. "General, they've proven that they don't need to fight to win." Rekar nodded slowly. "Exactly. Their greatest weapon isn't their ships, their weapons, or their technology. It's their minds. Their ability to make us fight ourselves without lifting a finger." The officer was quiet for a moment before speaking again. "Are we giving up, sir?" Rekar turned to face the officer. The words he had been thinking but couldn't bring himself to say hung in the air. Giving up. The Zorak had never given up before. It was not in their nature. They had fought countless battles, conquered countless worlds. To retreat was almost an impossibility for them. Yet here they were. "We're not giving up," Rekar said firmly, though there was doubt in his voice. "We're learning. We have no other choice but to learn from this. The humans have shown us a path. We can choose to fight them, to challenge them again, but we would be making the same mistake. The power we relied on doesn't matter to them, and if we continue down this road, we will lose more than we can afford." There was a long pause. The crew absorbed his words, each of them feeling the weight of the decision that had been made. The Zorak had been proud of their strength, but now they had to adapt. They had to understand that true power wasn't just about what could be destroyed. It was about what could be preserved. "General, do you think we'll ever see them again?" one officer asked hesitantly. "The humans, I mean." Rekar took a deep breath. The thought of crossing paths with the humans again was both terrifying and fascinating. The humans had made their point clear. They were not invaders. They were not conquerors. They didn't seek to destroy. They simply sought peace. Yet, even in their peace, they held immense power. The balance they had struck was something the Zorak couldn't fully comprehend, but it was something they respected. "I don't know," Rekar said finally. "But if we do, it will be on their terms, not ours. We can no longer assume we are the ones who set the rules of engagement. The humans have shown us that." Another officer spoke up, his voice quiet but determined. "What now, sir? What's our next move?" Rekar turned back to the front of the bridge, his eyes narrowing as he watched the stars in the distance. The path ahead was uncertain. There was no going back. The Zorak couldn't unlearn the lesson they had been taught. They had been humbled, and they would have to find a new way forward. "We return to our people," Rekar said at last. "We will rebuild, but we do so with a new understanding of what true strength is. It's not just in our weapons, not just in our numbers. True strength lies in knowing when to fight and when to walk away." He paused, reflecting on the long road ahead. The Zorak would no longer see themselves as the masters of the galaxy. They would no longer see themselves as invincible. The galaxy had changed, and so had they. They were no longer the conquerors. They were the learners, the survivors. The officer who had spoken earlier nodded slowly, as if accepting the reality of the situation. And what about the humans, sir? Rakkar looked out into the starry expanse once more. We leave them in peace. For now. The Zorak fleet drifted silently, slowly making its way back to the heart of their empire. They had learned an invaluable lesson, a lesson that would echo throughout their history. They had met a species capable of defeating them without lifting a weapon. And in doing so, they had been forced to confront the one thing they had always feared, that they were not invincible. As they left the human space behind, Rakkar couldn't help but wonder what the future held. Would the Zorak learn from this encounter, or would they eventually return to their old ways? He hoped they had learned the lesson well, for the galaxy was a vast and unpredictable place, and the humans, with their quiet power and patient resolve, were always watching.